Hey, hi. Welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the original podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner. I'm a critic, consultant, and programmer based in Toronto, and this is The Other Thing I Do. My guest this week is Bryan Fuller, a writer and producer whose resume reads like a hot list of some of modern television's most inventive and distinctive shows, from Dead Like Me and Wonderfalls to the stylistic breakthroughs of Pushing Daisies, Hannibal, and American Gods. This year, he made his first movie, Dust Bunny, an unquantifiable genre picture about a little girl who enlists Mads Mikkelsen to kill the monster under her bed. It had its premiere at TIFF last month, and it's screening at the Brooklyn Horror Film Festival this Thursday, October 23rd at 9 p.m. It's sold out, but there's a rush line. And trust me, you want to line up for this one. Bryan picked the 1978 version of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which is Philip Kaufman's update of the Don Siegel alien invasion classic from the 1950s, only Kaufman shifts the action from small-town America to San Francisco, where a pair of health department employees, played by Donald Sutherland and Brooke Adams, discover an alien invasion is already underway. With a slippery screenplay by W.D. Richter, unnervingly pulpy visual effects, and a frankly amazing cast that also includes Jeff Goldblum, Veronica Cartwright, Art Hindle, and Leonard Nimoy, this was easily the best version of Jack Finney's novel yet filmed. And it turns out to be meaningful to both me and Bryan on a very personal level. This is Someone Else's Movie.
I love this movie. I saw it in theaters in the holiday Christmas season, and I was aware while watching it that I shouldn't be. And I think I was 8 or 9.
I was about the same. I was 10.
And it was very much it kind of blew my mind, that I had access to it, that it was a PG movie, and that its themes and content were so adult, yet broad enough through that kind of science fiction lens that you were talking about previously, in terms of how we tell stories and how the conventions of science fiction, fantasy, and horror storytelling and narratives have so wormed their way into mainstream storytelling that we're aware of the devices and able to go with them a little more freely than perhaps we were pre-70s, pre that kind of science fiction integration into mainstream and summer blockbusters. So for me, the movie really opened up a lot of understanding on how we tell stories in a thematic way. And Body Snatchers films are always reflective of the time, whether it's the 50s or the 70s or the 90s. There's something always nipping at our heels in terms of our freedom of thought, our freedom of speech, our freedom of being, that feels relevant today more than ever.
Oh, I agree. I think that also I was too young to see it, and it was shocking to revisit it. I hadn't seen it in a while, so Kate and I watched it last week to prepare for this, and she was shocked at just how far it goes. She'd never seen it, and it's like not the violence and the nudity, but the emotional intensity, I think, is really the big shocker. Like the sense that the paranoia ramps really, really quickly, and the because in 1978, Watergate and Nixon fallout notwithstanding, there weren't a lot of downbeat science fiction movies.
No, but this came out a month after the Guyana tragedy, after Jim Jones and the Kool-Aid. So
I forgot about that.
Like there was something in the air about the dangers of groupthink that were kind of heralding the arrival of the movie in a strange way, because it had a social consciousness conversation around it with cultism and loss of self.
I guess I was insulated from that as a kid. The Guyana stuff, I associate it with, Est and psychotherapy and Primal Scream and all the other fad stuff that was going on. But of course, Guyana was part of that too, right? It was just
absolutely.
the logical endpoint.
It's the highest peak on that craggy crown.
I read the reviews at the time, and a lot of them seem to be understanding that the talk therapy that Leonard Nimoy's character puts people through is designed to emulate what was already in the B stories in Newsweek and Time, and people were already talking about it on talk shows that this was a new revolution. But Kaufman finds a way to turn it into a stranglehold, right? Like the world isn't changing, you are. You're the one
And,
who's losing it.
and I thought that was one of the more salient points of the movie and why its presence at that point in the timeline was particularly impactful is that there was so much gaslighting happening with the American people,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of coming out of the counterculturalism of the 60s and early 70s, and our distrust in the government, our distrust in systems of authority were peaking or peaking for where they were at that time, that set the stage for are characters who are all so beautifully drawn, and it's a movie filled with wonderful performances, not just Donald Sutherland and Brooke Adams, but Jeff Goldblum is wonderful. Veronica Cartwright steals every scene that she's in and just
Yeah.
tucks it under her arm and waves as she's walking off stage. And Leonard Nimoy is both typecast and counter typecast in the role in a way that what the fuck with his driving glove, and those little touches that were all really meticulous, and there was such a subversive kind of horror, and that I grew up in a big family in a violent home in the 70s and 80s, and I was the youngest of five, so I was already a little paranoid about my security as like a queer kid, and knowing that I was different, and knowing that I was surrounded by people who just wanted me to conform. So at that age, when you're 8 or 9 years old, and there are things happening in your brain where your relationship to the world around you is changing so significantly, and you're becoming less of a little narcissistic asshole and more of a person who's like, I am an individual in a world surrounded by other individuals who would have me caught in the current of public sway in a way that denies who I am, and those kind of little awarenesses of being a Star Wars obsessive, and having my parents hate it, like hate that I loved something so much that wasn't sports ball. And so I felt the psychology and the paranoia and the paranoid thriller of, it was like I felt like my own little Warren Beatty and Parallax View growing up in the household that I did. So seeing Invasion of the Body Snatchers at that time was kind of a very early relationship where you're not Bambi, you're not one of the dwarfs, and you're you're looking for yourself to be represented in storylines, and instead of seeing a character that I latched onto, I saw a predicament that felt so immediate and close to an experience that I was having growing up in a household that didn't want me to be who I was, and was working very deliberately against that self-expression. So all of those things kind of created a perfect storm of epiphany for me as an audience member in movies to transcend in a way that wasn't big space battles, but was battles for self-expression and identity that I didn't have words for, and I didn't have a parallel for or a parable for to express. So that's, there are many reasons why this movie resonates with me in such a strong way. And I feel like it was doing that for an America that was, post Nixon, post the government not being able to be trusted, and you have all of these wonderful moments throughout the movie where it's like the Jimmy Kimmel moment last week when it was like, oh shit, the bottom just fell out.
Yeah.
And it kind of felt like it was the bottom falling out for each of these characters in a wonderful paranoid way that we get to be scared in safe circumstances, but it is a nice reminder of how we should be frightened and when we walk out of the theater as well.
I'm really it's yeah, I'm struggling with the need to tell you my own experience, which is that my parents had divorced 6 weeks before we moved out, the house was sold, moved in with like my mom took the kids, my dad got an apartment. That was 8 weeks before, like the 1st of November of 78 was when my world ended. But I
Right.
had spent the last year watching my parents become more and more quietly hostile to each other. So I watched Body Snatchers, and that's my trauma coming out. Like I think the elasticity of the concept is such that we can all put ourselves onto it. But for both of us, it arrived to like it clarifies behavior in a way that we didn't know we needed clarifying.
Well, and at a time where our brains are adjusting to new operating systems
Hmm.
that they hadn't had before, because that is such an impactful time when absorption is very high, critical thinking is very low, and our relationship to the world and ourselves changes dramatically when we realize that we're we are not the world. We are just a small part in it.
Sure.
And that is uh the perfect time for me to see this movie.
I'm wondering too that had you seen the original beforehand? Because I
No,
had.
no. I had seen snippets of it on like Monster Theater on weekends, and I was aware of images from it more than the story of people uh fleeing crowds, and
Right.
I was aware more of like the monsters of Maple Street and the Twilight Zone episode. I was aware of those things because Twilight Zone was in syndication and I was seeing it quite a bit, and I love those stories, and those stories also were fueled by paranoia and your world starting to unravel beneath the surface that you won't know until it actually falls out from underneath you.
Mm.
So those I was aware, and that's 50s and 60s. So like these things have been percolating in the American consciousness for a long time. And also being kind of at that age vaguely aware of Nixon being a bad guy, vaguely aware of Jimmy Carter being a good guy, and that was kind of my awareness at that stage of like the adults in the room, and being aware. Like my first taste of politics were the niceties and the humanity of Jimmy Carter, and growing up in a place that was filled with Jimmy Carter Democrats. And so that was kind of happening around the same time that you had this symbol of what it is to be good and apolitic directly juxtaposed against the malevolence of politics and previous administrations, and how tenuous that uh, temperature is to maintain in a culture. So I feel like we're like all over the map in terms of why this movie is so wonderful and impactful, but it it was a an unsettling feeling walking out of the theater and wondering who you can trust, and already living in an environment where I didn't trust a lot of people to begin with, that gave me an affirmation to my paranoia that was satisfying.
Yeah, I see that too. I'm trying to put it in the context of it's like it doesn't comment on its time directly. That's what I was struggling with too. The sense that, Goldblum wears an army surplus jacket, but it's pretty clear he didn't actually serve.
But that is kind of post-Vietnam.
Mm.
And like if the Belichicks are the Bohemians in the story, and they are a couple that um,
They're new agey.
are they're new agey, but they're probably more representative than of what we perceive as San Francisco populace, being new agey, being open to new ideas, being uh, socially progressive in ways that uh, are counterculture
Mm.
to Donald Sutherland and Brooke Adams, who are in the healthcare system and in a government oversight position, as opposed to people who are buttresses to society, providing health and well-being on a spiritual level, contrasted with characters who are policing health and well-being. And that juxtaposition, as a kid, I knew I was more like Veronica Cartwright because she is my go-to person if she's on screen. I'm the little girl in the birds, I'm the hysteric on the Nostromo, and I'm the voice of reason in an alien invasion. So I love that she kind of continued this tradition of representing the audience in a way that even when she's being shrill as an alien, she's an accessible character and representative of the human reaction, the unsteady human reaction to circumstances. And I think in a way there's something proto Kevin Williamson about her character in Invasion of the Body Snatchers, because she is aware of the rules of the genre in a way that we saw, that was the linchpin of a lot of Kevin Williamson's great movies of the 90s, were characters who are aware of the genre that they are in and being able to navigate with the leap of this is no longer fiction, and we need to apply the rules of fiction to nonfiction in order to survive, because those are the only rules that we have. And so when she's uh, referencing when worlds collide to a pod person, there's a certain level of irony for the audience, wondering like, oh shit, you're telling the person who's already had his world collided with and is lost about a fictional story that you're about to immerse yourself into.
Yeah, and dragged headlong into it against her will too. Like she's the one who manages to get all the way through the narrative, really. And
I'm of the standpoint that she just turned around and ran. Like after we got swallowed by Donald Sutherland. I'm still hoping that she pulled her shit together, and let's do a sequel to the 1978 film with Veronica Cartwright leading the resistance.
I would honestly, it's so weird that this is what everybody is pitching sequels to the movie they picked this month. I don't know what it is.
Because we're not done with them. We're not done with living in that experience, and they resonate with us. So the stories are continuing in our life experience, and so it feels like they should be continuing for the audience's experience in some way.
It's funny because wanting this, and I agree, I would also love to see the pitch that you just pitched, but wanting this means that this poor woman has suffered for 40 years, 50 years. And we're going to see this now. That's the wreckage of her life, or whoever it is, if she survived what she became.
Well, I think that's another reason for, as a queer audience member looking at these films and looking at Final Girls in general, whether it is Veronica Cartwright in Invasion of the Body Snatchers or Sigourney Weaver in Alien,
Mm-hmm.
there is something about these people surviving and wanting to know that they continue to survive. And even though that is rife with challenges, we're hoping that they live to fight another day for our own ability to imagine ourselves living to fight another day.
Right. So I'm thinking of what they've done with Nev Campbell in the Scream movies, and even, Linda Hamilton in Terminator 2, and how that evolution is such that we keep coming back to that character and that point in time. That's all anybody wants from a Terminator sequel, and they can never have it.
Yeah, and I saw the new Scream movie. Nev Campbell is wonderful. And speaking of Kevin Williamson
Mm-hmm.
and how he changed horror in the 90s, and there's scenes in there that like I think are the best scenes in the franchise. And there like so I do think we are invested in those survivors of all, everybody sees themselves in a survivor in a different way, and a lot of the same way, a lot of nuances on that spectrum, but the commonality is, if these people who survive, who are usually women who are not set up in society to have the best shot at surviving, uh, do so, then for all of us who feel even smaller or insignificant or unmoored in our lives, it gives us a beacon.
Hey, it's Norm interrupting my own show to bring you up to speed on Shiny Things, my newsletter about physical media, culture, and the odd streaming project. Last week was all about new releases, including Warner's F1, Universal's Nobody 2, and Paramount's Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning, and there's a lot more coming up this week. Sign up for a 14-day free trial at shiny-things.ghost.io or find a link at the Semcast Blue Sky account. You like reading about movies? I like writing about them. Come check it out. And to pull it back to Body Snatchers and the woman who doesn't survive, who is the first person to figure things out and who should be the one who survives based on the structure, that's a real curveball in the third act when we lose Elizabeth, when Brooke Adams succumbs.
Oh, it's a terrible moment, and Donald Sutherland's performance of disgust and horror and loss is, that curdling vocalization that he makes when she literally slips through his fingers is heartbreaking, because that one of the things that I love about Invasion of the Body Snatchers is that, independent of all the horror and science fiction, you buy Brooke Adams and Donald Sutherland as a romance that their circumstances is resisting them coming together, and then those circumstances allow them to save each other in different ways,
Mm-hmm.
and yet they still lose. And that's sort of the tragedy of, and Jeff Goldblum goes running after the police to lead them away from his wife and his friends. There's and he's the one who's wearing the military jacket, and that seems like an affront to the war machine. It feels like it's a commentary on Vietnam, which was still resonating in the country, as well with movies like Coming Home that were part of the conversation. And this guy who's sort of like anti-war, but also anti himself in so many ways that are relatable as a writer. And one of my favorite lines in the movie, and or favorite moments in the movie, is in the bookstore when Jack is talking about how he has to choose each word individually,
Yeah.
and it sometimes takes him months to write a sentence. I found so fucking relatable when you're struggling with the right thing for a character to say that needs to have a bit of psychology and a little bit of thematics and a little bit of uniqueness. It does take a moment to craft those things in a way that, when Scribner just shits out a book every few months, and the commentary on consumerism at that point is also I mean, it's nothing like we're experiencing right now in the Bezos era of Amazon, but it is a bellwether of where we're headed as a society, and the fact that someone is a craftsman trying to give great care to the art that they put out in the world, and another person is not, and which one of them is the representative of humanity, which one is going to go out fighting, and which one is going to try to lure their friends into the trap.
Yeah. And which one is more successful as a result? Like the people who sacrifice themselves, whether they know they're doing it or not, are the heroes in this movie.
Right.
But they're not, they're all struggling against a system. I mean, I don't know that the pod people represent capitalism in quite the same way that the subsequent versions of the film have kind of played with that. Certainly, The Invasion, the one with Daniel Craig and Nicole Kidman, which we've all sort of collectively agreed never to speak of again, is
I've never seen it. I've
see,
only seen parts of it, and I'm like, should I revisit this? So it wasn't well reviewed at the time, so I was like, I love the Abel Ferrara version,
mm,
and Meg Tilly has the best human, there go the human scream of the franchise. As much as I love Donald Sutherland's final moment in the original, Meg Tilly like was terrifying when she points and screams
yeah,
and Snatchers.
yeah, she's great. Having just revisited them all, weirdly enough, because when The Invasion came out on 4K earlier this year or late last year, Arrow released a special edition, and they're trying really hard to reclaim it and kind of pivoted into this is what it was supposed to be all along before the interference. We still don't have anything other than the cut that was released with like the third act is different and there's a whole bunch of stuff that was added. But the idea is that the newest version, the 2007 version, is steeped in misogyny and casual white supremacy, just because those are the guys, they're government agents in suits, and that's the face of the masses is always male and white, and they're chasing Nicole Kidman over and over again, and it's implied that even before he got potted, her ex-husband was violent, and that's what she's dealing with. And it's a really convincing argument for the first 45 minutes, and then it all just gets thrown out the window. But the idea that the face of America is coming in 78, it's this, in 93, it's the military, and in 2007, it's Trump's people. Like it's MAGA. They don't know they're MAGA yet, but it's the guys who are going to become the Tea Party. It's the guys who are really happy Bush is still in office when this movie comes out. It's fascinating to me because the threat is external, but it's always expressed as a more perfect version of what we already have, right? Like when they arrive, they say you'll be yourself, but better.
The difference in the 70s version versus the 80s version is when they're giving the speech about, how great it is that you're not going to be bothered with love and all of these emotions that are positive emotions, arguably. And then when Kibner and Jack are making that argument in the 78 version, they just talk about not necessarily the good emotions, but the bad emotions. Like you won't have any of these bad emotions. So there was an honesty to the 50s expression of what you're in for. That's like you won't have love, you won't have hate, you won't have fear. Uh, all of these things that bother you and take up your time, you're going to be freed from. Whereas the 70s version is a little more dishonest and in neglecting to talk about, like, yes, you won't have these bad things, we're not going to talk about the good things that you don't have anymore. And to go to the consumerism, Jeffrey's there saying you're going to drive the same car and have the same house,
Yeah.
and that feels like it is making a comment on consumerism. Like you still get to have all the soulless things that you're drawn to as a human being. You just won't have a soul
Right.
to know how soulless they are.
Yeah. It always kind of pulls at me. If I was going to try to remake it now, I would make it voluntary. I would actually have it be the pitch and the sell and people accepting, buying into it, because it's almost an
But
argument
they
for,
are. We
yeah,
are.
right? Like we're living it. But imagine if there was such a simple choice. Like you can have an anti-anxiety drug that actually does remove your anxiety and lets you function normally instead of various side
And
effects or,
everything else it removes.
well, exactly. They just don't tell you that part. But if you conceal it into side effects and you read it really fast in the commercial, it'll take away your fear and your so the line in my head is simply that when people are offered the choice, there's just this casual little merchandising aspect to it of, like you want to have fear, you want to have anxiety, you want to have depression, you want to have sadness, you'll just live without all that stuff. And someone says, well, what about joy? What about love? And oh, you won't miss them. And
But and there's something about that as you're saying that it just like my brain went to the MAGA movement, which is strangely a one-to-one reflection, but also an inversion of a lot of those ideas, changing the narrative, denying truths, accepting an idealized version that is a lie. And I think that's where you're onto something with the cultism of it all and it being voluntary because I feel like at some intrinsic level, maybe this is giving people a self-awareness more than what they have. There is something about the acceptance of loss of certain aspects of your humanity to either own the libs or win,
yeah,
just win. And there's something about this movement to just win as opposed to coexist that is at the center of these Body Snatchers movies because you're either winning the alien invasion or you're losing the alien invasion or you're fighting it to the point that you're going to be wondering what's worth living for anymore. And there does feel like we are ripe for a mega cult analogy of a willful loss of humanity and just to win and say that it's about love and togetherness and Christianity when those things are part of the gaslighting.
yeah, all of those values are diametrically opposed to what it is that they want.
Right.
But
Right.
the
So like
pitch is,
maybe that's what is happening. Maybe we are in the middle of our body snatchers and this is just they're sleeping next to their televisions. And I shouldn't say they or us or we because it is so divisive and we've gone too far down that road. But we are talking about a binary system with these science fiction narratives of it's the humans versus the aliens and who wins.
yeah. And in most of the adaptations, they win, the they being the aliens, not MAGA, which I think is why maybe we're so hopeless right now about where things are going. But the fascinating, this was what I was thinking about when we were talking about the 50s versus the 70s version. I had seen the original and had no emotional stake in it because it was black and white and it was people in suits and it didn't feel real to me.
Right.
But seeing the 78 version in 1978 as a 10-year-old and coming outside into a world where people were dressed like that and looking like that, and it was in color, and we were in Toronto rather than San Francisco, but I had an understanding of what a city is by that point. It really was jarring in a way that none of the other versions has been. And probably that's because my brain was so elastic and I was a child. But
Right.
it also doesn't, because I think because it doesn't specifically, they never say Nixon, they never say Vietnam, none of those signifiers are ever spoken, they're just there, as opposed to all the other movies where it's tied into the here and now in a way that doesn't quite feel right. Like making it amorphous is far more effective to me.
Well, and I think it was very specifically amorphous. I mean, if you look at it's noir. Like it
Mhm.
is filmed, it is a color noir film. And there is such wonderful use of shadow throughout, particularly in the chase after they flee Donald Sutherland's apartment and the shadows rounding corners and those aspects of duality and are are haunting shadows that are literally chasing us or leading us. Those aspects of it with the sound design that is completely unnerving. Danny Zeitlin's score is so experimental in many ways, and there's so much happening with the sound design. Ben Burt did the sound
Yep.
design, from Star Wars. So there was a lot of he was finding a not terribly dissimilar vocabulary that he had with the kind of Western romp of the Star Wars films that were about giving technologies a heartbeat, whereas in Invasion of the Body Snatchers, he was giving paranoia a heartbeat and giving loss a heartbeat that was discordant. And at the same time, it had that thump, thump, thump drive of uh, building to a great loss. And whether like the cracking noises and the sort of oxygen pull sounds of the pods as they're erupting, and the whispers of the tendrils coming off of the pods as they're replacing people. All of these things created a an immersive, discordant shift off of our equilibrium, that we knew that we were no longer in our reality, but the danger was no less present, if that makes sense.
It does. And it struck me this time because Kate had never seen it and was absolutely disgusted by the pod effects in the best possible way because they're Cronenbergian
Yeah,
before
yeah,
Cronenberg was doing what he does now. And
yeah.
it's kind of this great little tipping point because Shivers and Rabbit have come out, but he doesn't have the money to do what he would subsequently do in The Brood, which was the following year after Body Snatchers. It's in this perfect little inflection point of everything that's going on. And
And
it's so, yeah, the physical degradation of the human body to become a pod person, none of the other films comes anywhere close. It's just organic and gross and sad.
and disorienting because it's you covered in mossy fungus, and there's something that you mentioned. Oh, yes, yes, yes. It's interesting, the extrapolation of the Brood in these circumstances, because the Brood almost feels like an inversion of the Invasion of the Body Snatchers motifs. Like they're all internalized in a way that both films are deeply psychological. One is using psychology as a delivery mechanism for some of the bigger fantasy ideas and the unorthodox psychiatry that's manifesting your wounds or your rage and those types of elements that do not have body. And Invasion of the Body Snatchers, conversely, is taking paranoia and giving it body in a way that both are playing with similar themes of the things that are inside us that either become external or external things that become internal and take us over. So there's a lot in that area. And was The Brood 80?
79.
Was it 79? Okay.
Yeah, I think it might have not been released until 1980, but it was made and ready to go in 79. And yeah, Cronenberg was even saying like it was his version of Kramer versus Kramer because it's about a
Right.
bad
Yeah.
divorce that goes terribly wrong. But
It's my favorite Cronenberg film.
ooh, really? It's up there for me, but I think, yeah, I don't know. I think Crash is always going to be my favorite just because he invents a new language.
Yes, I mean I've enjoyed all of his movies, but I would say The Brood is definitely like leaps and bounds, clearly my favorite. And I also have a soft spot for The Dead Zone, which I think, another beautiful Brooke Adams performance
Yeah.
that uh, is a really efficient adaptation of the novel, which is a healthy, chunky novel, and beautifully and elegantly distilled to like a clean 89 minutes or however long it is.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably my second favorite. I could rank them. I mean, I was planning to do a documentary about his work with actors, and that still might happen, God willing. But yeah, I could do the Cronenberg thing all day. And Dead Zone is also, incredibly relevant to the present moment, as it sadly turns out.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is the part where I awkwardly transition to Dust Bunny somehow.
Right.
I'm trying to figure
Good
out,
luck.
does Dust Bunny connect to Dead Zone in any way? Not really. Um, but it is like it is the standard exit question on the podcast. What, if anything, of the film that you chose uh, have you worked factored into your own work? Is appears in your own stuff? Have you quoted, borrowed, stolen? And I'm thinking in terms of the body stuff, Hannibal comes to mind, obviously for Body Snatchers, because they both understand the fragility of the human being, and of course, you have psychiatrist heroes.
Yeah, I feel like so much of my experience with the Body Snatchers hinges on the age at which I experienced it and that level of new thinking that I didn't necessarily have when I watched Star Wars or Close Encounters of the Third Kind or even Battlestar Galactica, which were all kind of high points of my cultural experiences as a child, that it really was about being a child watching this paranoid thriller, relating to it deeply in the sense that I was in an environment that was not accepting of who I am and trying desperately to change me with coercive techniques that didn't work. So I feel like that's more relevant to Dust Bunny than Invasion of the Body Snatchers' organic thematics.
Mm.
It was more about my experience watching Invasion of the Body Snatchers as an 8 or 9 year old and being able to see myself and my story in circumstances that had nothing to do with them. And for Dust Bunny, it is about a child who has an interesting relationship with parental figures in her life, and the resilience. If anybody, she's a little Veronica Cartwright trying to make it through with the limited skills that she's acquired in her short life to navigate monsters of all variety. So I would say less about the narrative and more about the thematics.
Yeah, there is a moment towards the end of Dust Bunny when the last puzzle piece fits into place, and I won't spoil any of it. Um, but when we are allowed to understand exactly how the world works, exactly what the rules are, exactly what's been going on, and it did feel like that kind of resonates with the big pivot in Body Snatchers, which is just now, it's not that all bets are off, it's that the trajectory is established and we can lurch into the final act and see where this takes us. But in both cases, the films have this incredible challenge of getting us to that point credibly, because if you make one wrong step, you give the game away. Body Snatchers comes across looking too silly, too broad, too anything. The tone of Dust Bunny is much more loose and whimsical and light, but you also have to steer us directly to that point without ever, like going off track.
Well, I think that's where the distinction is in terms of its genre, which I would say is a fairy tale.
Mm.
It's not scary enough to be a horror movie. It has horror elements. Um, but really it's about uh, our relationships to our past traumas and how much we carry them with us and how much of them we decide to let go. And there's something about the adults the adult fairy tale of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, in that all of these adults who have had their adult lives and their adult experiences and have a certain amount of self-reliance under their belt being thrust into circumstances where all of the systems of organizing society are now the villains. And, arguably there's villainy in those things every day. But now in this story, they're leached forward in a way that creates that childlike unease of overwhelming circumstances that are even more terrifying as an adult to experience because we've been lulled into a false sense of security that there are systems at play that will protect us. And I think both in Invasion of the Body Snatchers and Dust Bunny, you see characters realizing that the systems designed to protect them do not work, and it's up to you and the people that are close to you to survive it together if you can.
My thanks to Bryan Fuller, whose delirious directorial debut Dust Bunny is screening at the Brooklyn Horror Film Festival at 9 p.m. this Thursday, October 23rd, and opening everywhere in December. Don't miss the chance to see it with a crowd. Thanks also to Peter Kaplowski. He knows what he did. You can find Bryan on Instagram at BryanFullerGram, all one word, and you can find Invasion of the Body Snatchers on 4K and Blu-ray in a beautiful new restoration from Kino Lorber Home Video. It's also streaming on Prime Video in Canada and on HBO Max and Canopy in the US, and available to rent or buy on various VOD services across North America. You can find me on Blue Sky at Norm Wilner, and you can find this podcast there at Semcast, S-E-M-Cast, and on the web at someoneelsesmovie.com. The first year of the show is still available for just $20 at payhip.com/Semcast. That's the first 52 episodes of Someone Else's Movie, 41 of which aren't currently available anywhere else. And check out my newsletter, Shiny Things, at shiny-things.ghost.io. I think you'll enjoy it. Our theme song is by The Last Year. If you like it, or this show in general, please say so. Leave a review wherever you've been listening. Every little bit helps, it truly does. And check out the other shows on the Frequency Podcast Network while you're doing that. Stay safe, watch movies, get all the boosters. I'll see you next week.